Ni hao, sanbonani, salemu alaikum, jambo sana. These are greetings in different languages, and often many of your students will be sitting in classes in which English, the language you may be teaching in, is not their first language. And so it will sort of sound like a bunch of gibberish to them. They may even get it, but a whole lot later. So your job is to really understand the way language affects the way in which students are experiencing your classroom. If I was speaking in my mother tongue, Xhosa, right now, it has 3 clicks, the Q click, the X click, and the C click. I think it would sound more like music to you than it would an actual language, and that would impede your learning. And often what teachers will do is blame the students for not understanding, when in fact it's the teacher's role to make learning and language accessible to them. What is our agenda today? We're going to start off with the classic questions that I always try to pose to you. The reason why I pose these questions to you is because my job is not only to teach you content, but to provoke your thinking. All right? We're going to look at language, how it affects learning. We're going to talk about language and culture. And finally, we're going to talk about differentiated instruction. Okay. Now, the question I have to pose to you is, how could we think without language? Do we even think in language? When I say I'm going to pick up a bottle to drink, for example, or I think about food when I'm hungry, or I think about sleeping, do I think in a language? And if I think in a language, does it mean that if I'm taught in a different language that I have to translate? What do I think? Do I think with language, or do I think without language? Now, if you've ever had the experience of being in a classroom in which people are speaking languages different to yourself, what you will notice is that you translate it from English to your home language, and then you have to figure out how to translate it back into English. Okay. So in some ways, we do think in language. And other ways, the verdict is still out whether all of our thinking is in language or not. I want you to think about that in more detail. Now, language is a system of vocal sounds and non-verbal systems by which individuals communicate. One of my favorite things to do as a teacher when I have misbehaving children is to go and stand next to them while I'm teaching. You will notice that they get really uncomfortable and they stop doing whatever they're doing. The lesson and the fluidity of the lesson continues. That's a way of using nonverbal communication to get a point across without actually saying anything, right? They get your point. Try standing over someone's shoulder while they're trying to take an exam and see how they respond to you. It's this how nonverbal signs and signals, 90% of what we say to students is in the nonverbal realm, all right? Now, vocal sounds are also very important. You've got to make sure that the students who struggle to hear you are in the front. You've got to make sure that you speak clearly. You will notice that we put closed captions on these videos because I'm very conscious of the fact that the way I sound to your ear may not be very clear to you. And so I'm using both audio and visual in terms of the closed captions to support your learning. You as a teacher need to consider the same things. Finally, it is a critical tool in the development of identity, self-awareness, intellectual and psychological growth. I'm going to go back to this model. Remember, we spoke about language. We spoke about institutions. We spoke about symbols. And we spoke about policies. The one thing that all these things have in common is language. Language is not only its own thing, what we call something, right? What we call something. I'm going to just put that in parentheses. But each one of these rely on language to create meaning, to construct meaning. When someone says to me, real quick, the first time I heard that phrase, I was wondering whether the person was coming back. So I called them and asked them, you said real quick. Does that mean today, tomorrow, in an hour? It was because I didn't understand the meaning of their language, even though we were speaking English, right? The meaning was different. Now, students with limited English proficiency may suffer institutional discrimination. The link between language and institutions. And the link between language, institutions, and policies. Those students with limited English proficiency symbols are created out of them. Sometimes the symbol is known as ELL or ESL. it becomes not only a word or a phrase, but it also becomes a symbol with certain sets of meanings, and that's what we're going to be talking a little bit more about. Language as a socializing agent. I want you to take, you're probably at your laptop right now, you could be at your iPad. Stop this present right now and go and remember what socialization is, right? Just check out Wikipedia and find out what this word socialization means. Okay, welcome back. Socialization is a form of teaching children the hidden rules of the game. Sometimes they're hidden, sometimes they're not, but it's the rules of the game, all right? So language is used to socialize children into linguistic and cultural communities. Notice my formal language. Notice that I'm not screaming profanity. Notice that I'm speaking at a certain pitch to you when I could be speaking, if I was at home in South Africa, I would be speaking a lot louder and with a lot more expressions, and I would be moving a lot more. It would look something like this. But because I'm in the US and I've been socialized into linguistic and cultural communities, I learned that the appropriate way to teach you is to stand very still and use my arm to point at things, because that's the way in which people have socialized me to teach you. And because you as a US student are used to that, I'm trying to meet you where you are, okay? If I was teaching South African or African students, my mannerisms would be very different. My linguistic cues would be very different, okay? Children learn almost instinctively the right word, the right responses, and the right gestures for situations. Hello, how are you? Often people don't even respond. They just walk on. They don't really care about how the person is, but they still ask the question. This is a great example of that. Native speakers unconsciously know and obey the rules, customs of their language and community. Often I will get students who email me. I will call them into my office and ask them to read their emails aloud to me. And I ask them, what does this sound like? And often what it sounds like in reality is different to what they've written down, because the tone looks different. And often people will say things on email that they will not say in person, okay? So this is a good example of how these sort of, what we write down, the language we use, is different to the non-verbal communication that we have with one another. Almost all children have the ability to learn one or more languages. I'm not sure what they mean by native languages. Okay, I want to challenge this idea of native languages. All languages are native somewhere. All of us have the ability to learn languages.